Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Have you ever noticed how silence can be louder than noise? That's exactly what hit me every time I walked through my front door. The house felt like a giant empty cave after David packed his bags and left. It wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of silence that seemed to whisper reminders of what used to be there. 6 long months had crawled by since that terrible day. The first few weeks were like living through an earthquake, everything shaking, nothing stable, pure chaos in my heart and mind. But now it was different. The big shocks were over, but I still felt those little tremors. They'd sneak up on me at the strangest times, especially when I was alone in this huge old house that we bought together, with such big dreams. This house was full of David's fingerprints. Not literally, of course, but everywhere I looked, I saw his plans, his half-finished projects, his ideas that would never come to life. It was like living with a friendly ghost who kept reminding me of what might have been. The worst room of all was upstairs, that spare room that couldn't decide what it wanted to be when it grew up. First, David said it would be his home office. He measured the walls, picked out a desk online, even bought a fancy chair that sat in a box for months. Then we thought maybe it could be a nursery. He painted it a soft yellow neutral, just in case. But that dream never happened either. Finally, the room just became the place where we put things we didn't know what to do with. Old Christmas decorations, boxes of books we'd never read again, clothes that didn't fit anymore. It was like a graveyard for forgotten dreams. The walls were this awful beige color that had seen better days. Over the years, they'd turned yellow, like old newspaper, and they were covered with scuff marks and weird pale rectangles where pictures used to hang. Every time I peeked into that room, it felt like it was judging me, asking me why I was letting it stay so sad and empty. One morning, I woke up and decided enough was enough. That room needed life. It needed color. It needed hope. And maybe, just maybe, I needed those things too. I drove to the paint store with a mission. I didn't want anything safe or boring. I wanted something that would make me smile every time. I walked by. I found it a gorgeous blue that reminded me of summer evenings when the sky looks like it's been painted by angels. It was the color of possibility, of fresh starts, of better days ahead. Buying the paint was the fun part. I also grabbed rollers, brushes, tape, and all those little tools that make painting look professional. The sales guy was helpful, explaining which brush to use for corners and how to avoid those annoying drip marks. I felt excited, like I was planning a party, but then I got home and actually looked at that sad, empty room. Reality hit me like a cold splash of water. The paint cans sat lined up against the wall like a row of judges, waiting to see if I'd actually follow through. The room felt huge and overwhelming. Where would I even start? How long would it take? What if I messed it up? My daughter Sarah lived 3 hours away with her own busy life. My friends all had families and jobs and their own problems to deal with. I felt stuck, like I'd bitten off more than I could chew. During my usual weekly phone call with my cousin, Linda, I mentioned my painting project. I was probably complaining a little, if I'm being honest. Linda immediately jumped in with a solution. You know what? Mark could help you with that, she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. He's really good at that kind of stuff, Emily. He actually enjoys it. Crazy, right? You should see what he just did to our kitchen. It looked like a bomb went off for 3 weeks. But now it's like something out of a magazine. He practically rebuilt the whole thing himself. I paused, holding the phone a little tighter. Mark, Linda's husband Mark. Don't get me wrong, I liked Mark just fine. He was a good guy, the kind of person you could count on. But he was also quiet, the type who preferred listening to talking. He was steady and reliable, like a favorite old sweater. We saw Linda and Mark maybe twice a year, usually at holiday gatherings where everyone was trying to catch up on months of news in a few hours. At family parties, Mark was usually the guy, standing slightly apart from the main conversations, holding a beer and nodding politely. He'd talk about work stuff with the other men, or help fix something if it broke, but he mostly stayed in the background. He was Linda's husband, a nice man who I knew was there but didn't really think about much. The idea of spending an entire day, maybe even 2 days alone with him in my house felt weird. Not bad, weird, just strange. My home had become my private space, my healing place. Having someone else there, especially someone I barely knew beyond holiday small talk, felt like it might be too much. But Linda wasn't backing down, really. Emily, he'd be happy to help. He's been looking for an excuse to get out of the house anyway. Got him reorganizing the garage for the 3rd time this month. It's driving me crazy with all his projects. I could hear the affection in her voice, mixed with just a tiny bit of exasperation. It made me smile despite my hesitation. "I don't know, Linda," I said slowly. "I mean, it's really nice of you to offer, but I don't want to impose. He probably has better things to do on his weekend than help me paint." "Are you kidding? He loves this stuff. And honestly, it would be good for both of you. If you need help and he needs something useful to do, it's perfect." I chewed my lip, staring at the paint cans that were still sitting exactly where I'd left them 3 days ago. The thought of tackling that room alone felt overwhelming, but the thought of doing it with Mark felt complicated in a different way. "Okay," I finally said, surprising myself. "If he's really sure he doesn't mind, that would be amazing. But please, make sure he knows he can say no if he wants to." The next evening, my phone rang around 7 o'clock. I was washing dishes and almost didn't answer because I didn't recognize the number. "Thank goodness I did, Emily. This is Mark, Linda's husband." His voice was deeper than I remembered, kind of rough around the edges, but warm. "Linda said you might need a hand with some painting." "Oh, Mark. Hi." "Yes, that's so kind of you to offer, but please don't feel like you have to. I know you're probably busy, and I don't want to take up your whole weekend or anything." "Oh, no, I'm happy to help," he said, and I could hear a smile in his voice. "Besides, it keeps me out of trouble." Linda's got me doing honey-do lists that never seem to end. "How does Saturday morning look for you?" "I could come by around 10 if that works." "That would be perfect," I said, feeling a mix of relief and nervousness. "Thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate this." "Don't mention it. See you Saturday." Saturday morning arrived faster than I expected, bringing with it a whole bunch of feelings I hadn't planned on. I woke up early and found myself doing things I never usually did. I cleaned the house like my mother was coming to visit, even scrubbing the baseboards in rooms Mark would never see. I made coffee, even though I wasn't sure he drank it. I changed my clothes 3 times before settling on my oldest jeans and a t-shirt I'd owned since college that already had paint stains on it from some long-forgotten project. What on earth were we going to talk about for hours? I barely knew this man beyond the fact that he was married to my cousin and could fix things. What if we ran out of conversation after the first hour? What if he thought I was weird for living alone in this big house? What if he asked questions about David that I wasn't ready to answer? At exactly 10 o'clock, and I mean exactly, like he'd been sitting in his truck waiting for the right minute, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, smoothed my hair, and opened the door. Mark stood on my front porch looking different from how I remembered him. Instead of the nice polo shirts he usually wore to family gatherings, he had on a faded blue work shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His forearms were strong and lightly covered with what looked like sawdust from some project. He was carrying a canvas drop cloth that looked like it had seen plenty of use and a toolbox that was so organized and well-maintained it could have been in a magazine. He looked more real, I guess. More like himself instead of like someone trying to make polite conversation at a family dinner. "Morning, Emily," he said, giving me a genuine smile that immediately made me feel less nervous. "Smells like coffee in there." "It is coffee," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "I wasn't sure if you drank it, but I made some just in case." "The patient is upstairs, the room that needs rescuing." I led him up to the spare room, my heart beating a little faster as we walked. When we got there, he stood in the doorway for a moment, hands on his hips, just taking it all in. I held my breath, wondering what he was thinking about the sad, empty space. "Good-sized room," he said finally. "That blue you picked is going to look great in here. You got lots of natural light coming in from those windows?" That was it. No comments about why the room was empty. No awkward questions about what had happened to make it look so lonely. He didn't even seem to notice the sadness that I felt was practically painted on the walls. He just focused on the job ahead of us, like a professional who'd done this 100 times before. We spent the first hour working in the most comfortable silence I'd experienced in months. Mark showed me tricks I'd never learned, like how to tape the edges with perfect precision using a putty knife to seal the tape so paint wouldn't seep underneath. He laid out the drop cloths like he was setting up for surgery, every corner perfect, every wrinkle smoothed out. There was something about watching him work that was incredibly calming. His movements were efficient and confident, like he'd done this so many times that his hands knew what to do without his brain having to think about it. He wasn't showing off or trying to impress me. He was just working, steady and focused. I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't in months. The anxiety that had been sitting in my chest like a heavy stone started to dissolve. He didn't pry or ask uncomfortable questions. He didn't try to fill every moment with chatter. He just worked, and somehow that felt exactly right. Finally, he popped the lid off the first can of blue paint. The color was even more beautiful. Then I remembered bright and hopeful and full of possibility. "Right then," he said, handing me a roller with a smile, "ready to make a beautiful mess." The first stroke of that gorgeous blue paint against the tired yellowed beige was like magic. It was startling how much better it looked immediately. It felt like an act of rebellion, like I was taking back this space and making it mine again. I was reclaiming something that had been lost. In years, he listened intently, nodding, asking questions. That showed. He was actually hearing me. It felt good, easy, like talking to an old friend. Though we were practicalistrings just hours before the afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating. Dust motes dancing on the shafts of light, the room wastrons forming, bathed in the cheerful blue, it felt lighter. Hopeful Mark was working near the window, carefully cutting in edges with a small brush. The sunlight caught the flecks of silver in his hairlines etched around his eyes, looked up and caught me watching him, eye flushed, quickly looking back at the Wally. Painting, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the situation. Just the two of us shut away from the world sharing this task. These quiet revelations hadn't said anything. Just gave a small, almost imperceptible nod and went back to meticulous work, but something had shifted, a subtle awareness had entered. Room, a low hum beneath the surface off, our easy companionship. It wasn't uncomfortable, not exactly, it was just a recognition of shared humanity. Haps. A connection forged in paint fumes and quiet conversation. We work at done till the late afternoon light began to fade. The first coat complete, the room looked amazing. Vibrant and alive, Westwood side by side surveying our work, a shared sense of accomplishment. "Washing Govera's not bad." He said, his voice softer now. "Not bad at all. It's wonderful." "Mark," I replied, meaning Morathon, "just the paint, thank you, I couldn't they've done this alone." He looked at Methon, his gaze direct and thoughtful. "Everyone needs a hand. Sometimes Emilet's second." Day felt different from the start. The initial unfamiliarity was gone, replaced by the comfortable rhythm we'd established. Mark arrived with donuts and coffee, remembering. I took mine. "Black, we'd need to discuss the plan. We just full into it, taping off for the trim, laying down fresh cloths." The conversation picked up where it left easily, naturally. We were applying this coat of blue, the color depending into a rich velvety hue. Mark was on Asmel's stepladder, carefully painting Thestra above the window frame, while I worked on the opposite wall. We were talking about travel places we dreamed of going. I mentioned wanting to see the coast of Maine, the rugged cliffs and lighthouses. "I went there once," Mark said, pausing his brushstroke. "Just after high school with my dad. He loved sailing. Her airily mentioned his father who had passed away years ago. Linda had said it was a difficult relationship. Was it a good trip? I asked gently. He was silent, for a moment looking out the window, thou seeing. Something far away it was complicated. He finally said, his voice low. My dad was a hard man, not unkind, but demanding. Expected a lot that trip. It was the first time I felt like maybe he saw me. Not just his son, but me. He turned back, meeting my eyes there. Was a vulnerability in his expression that took my breath away. We were fixing a solly together. It had ripped in a squalland. He just started talking about his own father, things he'd never said before, regrets he had. He stopped, cleared his throat. It was just a moment, but it changed things between us. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, holding his gaze, trying to convey understanding. Fear in the room felt thick with unspoken emotion. My own relationship with my father had been loving but distant. We'd never shared that kind of breakthrough. I felt a pang of empathy for the young man. Mark must have been yearning for connection. I decided to share something personal. My mother. I began, my voice a little unsteady. She collected teacups, tiny, delicate things. After shedding, I found a hidden box filled with letters. She'd written to me, but never sent, about her fears, her hopes, things she could never say face to face. Mark came down from the steplo to setting his brush carefully on the edge of the paint tray. He leaned against the wheel near me, listening intently. Read them. I continued. It was like meeting Harold over again, seeing the woman behind. Mother, he nodded slowly. It's strange, isn't it, how the people closest to us can still feel like strangers. Sometimes we stood there for a long moment, Thieselance stretching, filled not with awkwardness, but with a profound shared understanding. The space between you seemed to shrink, charged with an unexpected intimacy. It wasn't romantic, not sexual. It was deeper, more fundamental. A connection forged in shared vulnerability, in the quiet acknowledgement of life's complexities and the hidden depths within the people. Lou, think we know. He reached out, not to touch me, but gestured towards the wall I'd been painting. You missed a spot, he said softly, a small smile playing on his lips, breaking the intensity. I looked, and sure enough, there was a faint patch of beige showing through the blue eye. Laughed, a release of tension. Guess I got distracted. Happens, he said, picking Oopie's brush again, but the moment lingered. Stared confidence, the glimpse behind curtain each of us had offered the author. It hung in the air, shimmering like a dust motes in the sunlight, changing the atmosphere of the room, changing the dynamic between us into something quieter, deeper, and unexpectedly resonant. He finished the trim in a comfortably quiet. The earlier intensity softened in gento, a warm camaraderie. The emotional peak had passed, leaving behind a sense of closeness, of having navigate something significant together. Cleaning up felt like the gentle unwinding after its main event. We worked together, smacely rolling up the drop cloth, sealing the paint, cans, washing, brushy sand, the utility sink downstairs. The conversation was lighter now, easy banter about whose painting technique was superior. Mock arguments over the best way to clean rollers, but underneath the lightness, the resonance of that charade moment of vulnerability remained. Mark packed his tools methodically, wiping each one clean before placing it in the sturdy toolbox he gathered. The empty donut box and coffee cups, standing in the newly painted room, bathed in the soft glow, offsetting sun filtering through that clean windows, felt like standing in Sita. Promised the blue was perfect, calm, deepened, full of possibility. It was more things just a painted room. It felt like a space claimed, not just from neglect, but from sadness. It looks incredible. Mark, I sagely grateful. Thank you. Doesn't seem like enough. He closed his toolbox with acquiescent click. It was my pleasure. Emily's, seriously, it was nice. He looked around room, then back at me. It's a good color. Feels hopeful. That was Thruward. He'd helped bring hope back in Tetha's room, into this house, and maybe in Tom as well. We walked downstairs. Anne stood by the front door. The awkwardness side initially dreaded felt like a distant Memory in its place was a quite respect a warmth that felt. Earned Anjanou and Linda will be thrilled we didn't kill each other. I joked Hetcha called a rich, easy sound. Nah, we make a good team. He paused his hand on Theodore Rourke knob. Listen. Emily, about earlier thanks for listening. Thank you to Mark. I replied softly, for sharing there was a moment of hesitation. A look that passed between us, an acknowledgement of the unexpected depth wed. Found in each other a silent promise to respect that boundary and the context of our connection rooted in family and friendship. It was a connection I hadn't anticipated, born from the simple act of painting a room bed. It felt significant. He gave a final nod, a small smile, and then he was gone. His truck pulling away from the curb, I closed the door and leaned against its scent of fresh paint. Filling the hallway, the house didn't feel quite sompty anymore. The silence wasn't echoing, it felt peaceful. The experience hadn't been what I expected. There was no dramatic, unbelievable event in the way sensational stories often portray. The unbelievable part wasn't about scandal or forbidden actions. It was about the surprise of forging such a deep, genuine, entirely respectful emotional connection with someone I barely knew, Samin, who was simply my cows and shoes bend. It was about the discovery that vulnerability could be shared safely, that understanding could blossom in the quiet spaces of a shared task. It was about seeing someone and perhaps seeing myself in a new and unexpected light. I walked back upstairs and stood in the doorway of the blue room. It felt like mine now, a space not defined by loss, but by the quiet strength of renewal, the unexpected gift of connection, and the subtle, surprising ways life could unfold when you simply upon the door and let someone in to help you paint it. Was a reminder that meaningful connections can arise in the most unexpected circumstances, built on mutual respect and the quiet courage to be vulnerable. And sometimes that's the most unbelievable thing of